بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. We are continuing on with our third lesson on Ibn Hisham's Al-I'rab and Qawa'id Al-I'rab, and we'll be covering those sentences which have a mahal. So he says المسألة الثانية في الجمل التي لها محل من الإعراب. Regarding those sentences that have a mahal, they have a place in i'rab. Now, the first step over here is to understand what it means to have a mahal in i'rab. Okay, and to do that, we'll go over a few important points. The first of those is that what are the three types of i'rab that are generally mentioned by the grammarians? They mentioned al-i'rab al-lafzi. Um, they mentioned al-i'rab al-lafzi. And that's very simple and very easy to understand. Right? It's the i'rab you normally see at like of Zaydun. So you say Zaydun, Zaydan, and Zaydan. They mention al-i'rab at-taqdiri. And that is also quite simple to understand. And due to the last letter in that word not being capable of having an apparent haraka, you'd have to assume one, like in Musa. But then they have al-i'rab al-mahalli. And this is an area where students oftentimes they don't quite understand what al-i'rab al-mahalli is. Number one, where does al-i'rab al-mahalli occur? Generally speaking, you've seen al-i'rab al-mahalli occurring in the mabniyat, right? Like ha'ula'i and huwa, etc. And you've also seen it occurring within a jumal, like al-jumlatu fi mahalli kada wa kada. في بعض الجمل to be exact. This is where you see al-i'rab al-mahalli. What does i'rab mahalli mean? The meaning of i'rab mahalli is that we have a sentence or a word in a certain place where if we were to put a mufrad, and to be exact, an ism mu'rab, if we were to put an ism mufrad, a non-sentence, which is an ism mu'rab, in its place, it would end up being marfu', mansoob, or majur. So for example, you have the word ja'a hadha. Okay? Or just say ja'a ha'ula. These people came. Now instead of ha'ula, if I was to put an ism mu'rab, right, like a nas, in its place, clearly it would be in rafa. Alright? Likewise, for instance, if I had ja'a rajulun yas'a. This is an example of a sentence. A man came running. Ja'a rajulun yas'a. Now, in this example, if I was to put a mufrad, again, mufrad over here doesn't mean a single word, it means a non-sentence, as mentioned by Al-Kafiyaji. If I was to put a non-sentence in the place of yas'a, that non-sentence, in this case sa'iyan, would be in nasab on account of being hal. So what we mean by i'rab mahalli is that the sentence or the mabni word is coming in the place of an ism mu'rab, such that were an ism mu'rab to be in its place, it would actually reflect its i'rab of rafa, nasab, and jar. This is what i'rab mahalli means. And in i'rab mahalli, you can't actually show the i'rab and ha'ula or yas'a. But the word as a whole will be experiencing that i'rab, even though it will not reflect it, not on a lafzan level, nor on a taqdeeran level. Okay, then there's another interesting place which we've also mentioned previously. There's certain times you would say, for instance, that a word has an i'rab lafzan and it also has an i'rab mahallan. So if you say, for instance, ma ja'ani min kitab, right? Like your friend says, like, oh, I sent you a letter. You're like, no, ma ja'ani min kitab or min risala. Like, no letter reached me. Now over here, kitab, we would say lafzan is in jar. It's majur lafzan. But mahallan, we would say it is it's in rafa. It's actually the fa'il of ja'a, right? Over here, when we say mahallan, right, what we mean by mahallan over here is that there's two i'rabs, but because the word can't obviously show both i'rabs, it will show the apparent i'rab on account of the min za'ida before prior to it, and its actual state of rafa will be understood. Certain scholars refer to this as taqdiri, others refer to it as mahalli. It's not a big deal. As long as you understand that i'rab mahalli primarily occurs within mabniyat and within sentences. And the meaning of this is that were we to change or place in the place of these sentences and mabni words a single word, by single word I mean a non-sentence, and mufrad referring to a non-sentence. We've already taught you the different types of mufrad according to the grammarians, or you will come across them in Mutammimatul Ajurumi, in our explanation of Mutammima. And we've quoted this from Al-Adawi from his commentary or his footnotes on Shudud al-Dhahab. Now, the point is that mufrad over here means a non-sentence. If I was to place a non-sentence in the place of either a mabni word or a full sentence, would it experience an i'rab? If the answer is yes, if we were allowed to actually switch out the mabni word and place an ism marab in its place, and it would be in rafa nasab or jar, then you would say that that mabni word is fi mahalli kada wa kada. That sentence is fi mahalli kada wa kada. Now, obviously, in certain scenarios, a sentence cannot be switched out with a non-sentence. And the easiest example for this is a sila. The sila cannot be a non-sentence, right? So if I say, for instance, ja alladhi yadrus, I cannot say ja alladhi daris, for instance, by switching it out with a mufrad, non-sentence. That would be incorrect, simply on account of the fact that al-sila must be a full sentence. So over there, we would say that this is a jumla which has la mahalla laha min al-i'rab. It has no place in the i'rab on account of the fact that it can't be switched with a mufrad that would it should reflect, or that would actually experience the states of rafa, nasab, and jar. All right, this is quite easy to understand. I'm hoping it's quite easy to understand, and this is mentioned by the grammarians. And Al-Attar in his Hashia on the An-Azhari's commentary, he's mentioned this in quite a few places. We'll just read one or two of these. He says, he quotes from Kafiyaji, in fact. He says that فَإِن قُلْتَ الْجُمْلَةُ مِنْ حَيْثُ هِيَ جُمْلَةٌ لَا يَتَصَوَّرُ تَوَارُدُ الْمَعَانِي الْمُوجِبَةِ لِلْإِعْرَابِ عَلَيْهَا كَالْمَبْنِيَّاتِ فَكَيْفَ يَكُونُ لَهَا إِعْرَابٌ مَحَلِّي. The issue over here is that a sentence, on account of being a sentence, right, it doesn't have multiple roles it can play. Why do we have i'rab in the ism? Like, what's the base of this entire discussion? The base of this entire discussion is we have i'rab in the ism on account of the fact that an ism can play multiple roles. An ism can become a fa'il, it can become a mubtada, it can become etc, etc, etc. And that's why we have i'rab in the ism. But a sentence isn't like that. All right, you don't have multiple meanings or roles entering upon a sentence such that it can play multiple roles. So technically speaking, you should not have i'rab in sentences. And that is the asl, but that's the default position. That's why Ibn Hisham, in his Mughni, he actually brings al-jumal allati la mahalla laha min al-i'rab first. Over here, he wrote this book earlier, remember? He brought al-jumal allati laha mahallu min al-i'rab first. But in his al-Mughni, over there, he brings al-jumal allati la mahalla laha min al-i'rab first. And he explains that the reason I've done this is because, technically speaking, the default in sentences is that they can't come into place, or a non-sentence can't come in its place. And for that reason, it should not be experiencing a place in i'rab. So Al-Kafiyaji replies that when we say a sentence is experiencing i'rab, what we intend to say is قُلْتُ إِنَّهَا حِينَئِذٍ فِي قُوَّةِ الْمُفْرَدِ. Even though it's a sentence, it's in the meaning of a non-sentence. Again, mufrad over here means a non-sentence. It's in the meaning of a non-sentence on account of that. And on account of that, we can say that it has a mahal in al-i'rab, were to be substituted or replaced with an ism mu'rab. That ism mu'rab would show its i'rab. And one easy example to understand this is if you say, for instance, أظن محمدا أبوه قائم. I believe Muhammad, his father, to be standing. I.e., I believe Muhammad's father to be standing. If you were to switch out Abuhu Qa'im, which is a full sentence, with a mufrad. Again, mufrad over here means a non-sentence. Right? So we're bringing in ism al-fa'il. أظن محمدا قائم الأبي. I believe that Muhammad, his father, is standing. Notice over here that by switching out Abuhu Qa'im, this entire sentence, with the structure, with the mufrad Qa'im, clearly the i'rab over there is showing, and that ism mu'rab is experiencing i'rab. So when we say these sentences can experience i'rab, what it means is that as a whole, the sentence can be replaced with a non-sentence, hence it having an i'rab. And that's what Al-Attar writes. أي أنها تحل محل المعرب فيطرأ عليها الإعراب لحلولها ذلك المحل. What does it mean for a sentence to have a mahal min al-i'rab? It's coming in the place of a mu'rab word. And for that reason, it will receive i'rab because it's coming in its place. فمن ثم قيل, and for this reason we say it's al-i'rabu mahalli. Right? It's the i'rab of the placement. أي حاصل. The reason we have the i'rab is because بسبب الحلول في هذا المحل, because this sentence or this mabni word is coming in the place where were it to be switched out or substituted with in an ism mu'rab, it would experience i'rab. نعم. Now whether you reinterpret that sentence to be in the power of a mufrad word, because generally speaking what happens in khabar and haal is that you're going to reinterpret the sentence to be in the power of a mufrad word. This is a different discussion. The reason they say this is because the default in khabar and haal is that it should be a mufrad. So whenever you have a sentence, we're already going to re-understand it to be in the meaning of a mufrad. But that's not always the default. If you have something which is mahkiyya bil qawl, if I'm coding someone's statement, in that scenario, I can be coding an entire sentence as a sentence. So I'm not going to reinterpret that sentence to be in the power of a mufrad. I'm coding a sentence as a sentence. But because that sentence as a whole is coming in the place of a mufrad in non-sentence, it will receive an i'rab. And he'll mention later on that when we say al-hikaya, hikaya means to basically retain something upon its original form. And that's why the mahkiyya bil qawl, if a sentence has been said originally, it will be retained upon its original form. Now this last point I made about whether it's in the interpretation of a mufrad or it's not in the interpretation of a sentence, of a mufrad, you can leave that out. That's not important. What you have to understand over here is that the idea of i'rab is we have three types of i'rab. I'rab lafzi, very simple to understand. I'rab taqdiri, also very simple to understand. And finally, we have i'rab mahalli. I'rab mahalli means that this word or this sentence, were we to have a non-sentence in place of it, and it's a mu'rab, it would actually experience i'rab. And so we're giving it an i'rab, a place in i'rab, on account of the fact that it's coming in place of a non-sentence. Okay, or it's coming in place of an ism mu'rab that would experience i'rab. Not that it itself has different meanings entering upon it. It itself can play different roles. Okay, number one. Number two, i'rab mahalli can be used in another meaning, where we say that it's the i'rab is mahallan on account of the fact that the word itself, lafzan, is already experiencing a certain i'rab. ما جاءني من كتاب من الزائدة, kitab lafzan is forced to experience jar. But in terms of the placement, it's actually in the place of rafa. Some refer to that as i'rab taqdiri, others refer to that as i'rab mahalli. It's not a big deal as soon as you understand this. Okay. نعم. Then he says وهي سبع. There are a total of 7. Now this right now over here is mentioned 7, but in the Mughni he'll actually add on more sentences which certain grammarians believe to be, or it's believed to have a mahal, and that's a discussion for later. You don't have to worry about that right now. Number 1, he mentions إحداها الواقعة خبرا. That sentence which is coming in the place of a khabar, which is serving as the khabar. Okay. Now, if a sentence is serving as a khabar, it doesn't always mean it's in rafa. And he himself explains this. وموضعها, it will be in the place of رفع في بابي المبتدأ وإن. In the chapter or in the sentences which have a mubtada and an inna. So the khabar is a full sentence coming either after a normal mubtada, we're going to say that al-khabaru fi mahalli raf'in, or it's coming after an inna and an ism of inna. In which case we're going to say it's fi mahalli raf'in once again, because the khabar of inna is in rafa. Nahwu, such as Zaydun qama abuh. Zayd, comma, his father stood. So over here, very simple. Al-jumlatu fi mahalli raf'in li'anna khabaru al-mubtada. And likewise, inna Zaydan abuhu qa'im. Once again, abuhu qa'im, al-jumlatu fi mahalli raf'in li'annaha khabaru inna. Okay. Nasbun, and its state will be, or its place will be that of nasab fi babay kana wa kada. If it's serving as the khabar of kana and kada. Because the khabar of kana and kada are mansub. Nahwu, such as كانوا يظلمون. Right? يظلمون over here الجملة في محل نصب لأنها خبر كان. والثاني نحو وما كادوا يفعلون. Second is like وما كادوا يفعلون. They were close to not doing so, or it was very difficult for them to do so based on the different tafsir that is understood over here. نعم. يفعلون is في محل once again نصب لأنها خبر كاد. Okay, this is very simple and very easy. Now, once again, like I mentioned to you, I want everyone to look for examples. So I will be looking forward to hearing your examples or seeing you comment them. Right now, we've mentioned a few examples for you of each of these 4 which is mentioned. The first example is وَالْمُطَلَّقَاتُ يَتَرَبَّصْنَ بِأَنفُسِهِنَّ ثَلَاثَةَ قُرُوء. That the divorced or the divorcees, a divorced woman, is expected to perform her idda, wait for ثلاثة قُرُوء, 3. What does quru mean? Now, this is a fiqhi discussion. As the Hanafiya say, it refers to the menstrual cycle. They should wait for 3 menstrual cycles. meaning they're not allowed to wed or marry another man in these 3 menstrual cycles. Notice over here, يتربصن بأنفسهن 3 قروء is serving الجملة في محل رفع لأنها خبر المبتدأ. And at this point, you understand the importance of learning جملة صغرى and كبرى. Because now you've understood that the smaller sentence will end up in certain scenarios having a role or playing a role in the bigger sentence, and it will have a state as a whole. The sentence as a whole will be experienced, not experiencing state, but will be in the place of a state on account of it being in the place of a mufrad. Okay, there's a really good discussion over here by Ibn Ashur with regards to what exactly is intended over here, but this is a balagha discussion, and for that reason, on account of being short on time, we'll leave it for now. وقوله تعالى, like with the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, إِنَّ اللَّهَ عِنْدَهُ عِلْمُ السَّاعَةِ. Indeed, Allah, comma, with Him alone is the knowledge of the hour. Now notice over here, عِنْدَهُ عِلْمُ السَّاعَةِ. This is a full sentence. If you put your finger on the first 2 words, إِنَّ لَفْظُ الْجَلَالَةِ, cover them, and you read عِنْدَهُ عِلْمُ السَّاعَةِ, with Him is the knowledge of an hour, that's a full sentence. So therefore, this entire sentence is في محل رفع لأن خبر إن. Alright, now this is an example of, from a nahwu perspective, it's an example of a sentence becoming the khabar of inna. But from a balagha perspective, why was the structure mentioned in this manner? Why say inna allaha indahu ilmu sa'a as opposed to inna ilma sa'ati indallah? Now, if you were to say inna ilma sa'ati indallah, we actually don't have a sentence becoming the khabar of inna. All right? Unless you assume a fi'l before inda. But generally speaking, you'd assume, for instance, in ilm al-sa'ati, thabitun indallah, or mawjudun indallah. Okay? Although you're all allowed to assume a fi'l. But in this scenario, you wouldn't have a sentence being fi mahalli raf'in. It'll just be a mufrad. Number 2, inna ilm al-sa'ati indallah is more brief. It's less words. And generally speaking, in Arabic, if you can convey a meaning with less words, that's better. So why did we opt away from this shorter structure to inna Allah indahu ilmu sa? This is from the balagha. Again, this is not primarily, it's not our primary concern, but we're mentioning this as a tafsir benefit. Inna Allah indahu ilmu sa'a. He says, لأن اسم الله سبحانه أحق بالتقديم. He says that bringing the name of Allah first, obviously Allah's name is more entitled to be brought first. If you said inna ilma sa'ati indallah, now you've moved lafzul jalala till the end. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, on account of His greatness and His great knowledge, it's only right that we bring His name first. Hence, inna Allah indahu ilmu sa'a. Number 1. Number 2, وَلِأَنَّ تَقْدِيمَهُ وَبِنَاءَ الْخَبَرِ عَلَيْهِ يُفِيدُ الْحَصْرِ كَمَا قَرَّرَهُ الطِّيبِي. He says, by bringing it earlier, and then bringing a sentence as its khabar, bringing a structure as its khabar, this gives the benefit of hasr. Right? Inna Allah indahu ilmu sa'a. Al-Tibi explains that by bringing lafdul jalala earlier, and likewise indahu, by bringing this earlier as well, we get the benefit of al-hasr. And that's why I translated this, indeed, Allah alone has the knowledge of the unseen. So that's reason number 2. And reason number 3, مع ما فيه من مزية تكرر الإسناد. He says that, reason number 3, sometimes when you really want to drive a point home, you bring the mubtada twice. Okay? Zaydun, for instance, huwa ad-darib. It is Zayd alone that hit. Now, I could have said Zaydun darib, Zaydun ad-darib. But to really drive the point home that it's Zayd that did this action, I brought a second mubtada. Alright? Likewise over here, when you say inna Allah or inna ilma sa'ati indallah, over here you have a single structure. But by saying inna Allah, you're going to make lafdul jalala mubtada and awwal. Okay, and then the sentence, entire structure, isnad of it will be done to lafdul jalala. Now, when we look into the sentence itself, we have another khabar and a mubtada. So, of course, if we have another khabar and mubtada, we have a repetition of the musnad and musnad ilay. And in doing so, we're adding in more emphasis, just like we did in Zaydun huwa ad-darib. Indeed, it is Allah alone, or surely, indeed, it is Allah alone who has the knowledge of the hour. Okay, and then beyond that, with taqdeem al-dharfi yufidu al-ikhtisas. Alright? by bringing the word inda earlier, this adds an extra layer of ikhtisas that Allah alone has this. بل لفظ عند كذلك. In fact, using the word inda, it also gives this meaning. All right. لأنها تفيد حفظه, because he did not say إن الله له علم الساعة, that Allah has with him the knowledge. No, Allah inda means that this knowledge of the hour is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's as if it's right beside him. Allah is protecting it. Now, obviously, when we say this, it's figurative, but the meaning we're trying to employ over here, to give over here, is that Allah alone has the knowledge of the unseen. No one else has it. And you'll see over here that the reason this verse is mentioned, because disbelievers, they would taunt the Prophet and ask him that when is the knowledge of the hour, when is the hour coming? Bring the hour about if you can, etc., etc. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is answering them and bringing multiple levels of emphasis. This is the beauty of the Quran. And this is something you're not going to understand in translations. Bringing multiple levels of emphasis. Number one, the inna. Number two, takarrur al-isnad. Number three, the idea of what's it called? Hasr, which is understood from bina al-khabari alayh. And number four, ikhtisas. And then bringing Allah's name first, because He is the one who has knowledge of this. All of these different levels of emphasis, showing that it is Allah alone that has knowledge of the unseen. Now, in English, you can't really convey all that, because the most you can say, surely it is Allah alone that has knowledge of the unseen. But that's only two levels of emphasis. Inna is one level of emphasis, and then alone is the level of hasr. But in Arabic, we have multiple levels of emphasis, all right? And we have multiple levels of hasr and ikhtisas. And you won't be able to convey this properly in English, and which is why we say that translations are good, but what's missed out in translations is often more than what's caught in translations. Now, وَقَوْلُهُ تَعَالَى وَمَا كَادُوا يَفْعَلُونَ. يفعلون over here is serving as the khabar of kada. الجملة في محل رفع عفوا في محل نصب لأنها خبر كاد. You don't want to say it's khabar, you want to say it's في محل نصب لأنها خبر كاد. And وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ بِمَا كَانُوا يَكْذِبُونَ, that these people will have a painful torment بِمَا كَانُوا يَكْذِبُونَ, on account of their lies. Now over here I'm translating the maz masdariya. Okay, they will have a punishment, a painful torment on account of بِمَا كَانُوا يَكْذِبُونَ, their lies. يَكْذِبُونَ over here is serving as في محل نصب لأنها خبر كان. You can also take the ma to be موصولة, all right, and then in the other recitation, the verse is بما كانوا يكذبون. So you would say بما كانوا يكذبون, and then we would assume there's a hidden who over here, the a'id. It's the pronoun referring back to the ma, due to what they would spew. Why am I translating this as spewing over here? Because As-Sameen al-Halabi mentions in the Durr al-Masun that one of the meanings of yukadhib or takdhib is to spew lies, right, as opposed to belie something. And that's what's intended over here. وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ بِمَا كَانُوا يَكْذِبُونَ. We'll come back to this verse later on, بإذن. Alright, so we've understood now the first of these structures is الواقعة خبرا. The second one, which has a محل من الإعراب, is, and the third, الثانية والثالثة الواقعة حالا والواقعة مفعولا. That which is serving as the hal, and that which is serving as the maf'ul, ومحلهما النصب. And both are in the state of nasb or nasb. Okay. Now, hal is quite obvious. It's in the state of nasb. But what about al-waqi'atu maf'ula? And I want you to pause the video and think, is there a scenario when a sentence which is serving as the maf'ul bihi will actually not be in nasb? Now, when we say maf'ul over here, by the way, we're referring to maf'ul bihi. Because majority of grammarians, they said that other mafa'il cannot actually serve as sentences. Only the maf'ul bihi can serve as a sentence. But over here, is there a scenario where a maf'ul bihi will not actually be in the state of nasb? The answer is yes. The mahkiya bil qawl, right? That's which is being coded through the word qala. Okay, if it's brought as a normal ma'ruf or al-fi'l al-mabni lil fa'il verb, qala kada wa kada, you'll have al-jumlatu fi mahalli nasbin li'anna mahkiyatun bil qawl. But what if qala is not brought like that? What if qala is brought upon the sigha of al-mabni lil maf'ul? Now think of this. Try thinking of this. If qala is brought upon the sigha of al-mabni lil maf'ul, meaning it will not receive a maf'ul bihi now, rather it's going to receive a naib al-fa'il. And if it is receiving a naib al-fa'il, what does that mean? What that means is that it will no longer have a maf'ul bihi in the state of nasab, rather it will receive a naib al-fa'il in the state of rafa. So when he says they're always in nasab, technically that's not the case, because we do have an example of the naib al-fa'il of qala specifically, not of other verbs, of qala specifically being in the state of rafa. But again, someone can make the argument that it's no longer really a maf'ul bihi, now it's a naib al-fa'il. But that should be mentioned over here. So he says وَمَحَلُّهُمَا النَّصْبُ. These two are in the state of nasb. فَالْحَالِيَّةُ نَحْوُ. So the example of the jumla حالية is وَجَاءُوا أَبَاهُمْ عِشَاءً يَبْكُونَ. And they came to their father at night crying. And they came crying to their father at night. So يبكون over here is a jumla في محل نصب لأنها حال من ضمير جاءوا or من الواو. Alright. Now over here, just an extra benefit. جاء. Can جاء have a direct maf'ul bihi? No, right? Like generally speaking, you say جاء إلى. جاء إلى المدينة. So and so person came to the blessed city of Al-Madinah, Al-Munawwarah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala take all of us there. You would say جاء إلى المدينة. You wouldn't say جاء المدينة. So either over here, either you say it's منصوب بنزع الخافض. Right? There was actually an ila over here, and that ila was dropped, and hence the detail of the verb reverted back to its original state of nasab. This mansub bin al-khafid. Or you can say something we learned in our previous lesson, I believe in lesson 1, that there is tadmeen occurring over here. Ja'a has the meaning of ata. Ata can actually have a direct maf'ul bihi. You can say atal madinata. So ata has the meaning of Ja'a, has the meaning of ata hidden within it, and for that reason it can be brought with a direct maf'ul bihi on account of the meaning of ata being found within it. Okay? Alright. وَالْمَفْعُولِيَّةُ تَقَعُ فِي أَرْبَعَةِ مَوَاضِعٍ. Now, again, Jumla Hali is very simple. Again, in terms of meaning, you can play around with this a lot because the hal has different ways and different usages. But that's something which we'll discuss in more detail in Tafsir bi'idhnillah, in our linguistic Tafsir. For now, just understand that a sentence can come in the state of nasab on account of being hal, and we'll take a few examples regarding this later on. وَالْمَفْعُولِيَّةُ تَقَعُ فِي أَرْبَعَةِ مَوَاضِعٍ. The sentence which is serving as a maf'ul will occur in 4 places. Number 1, مَحْكِيَّةً بالقول بالنصب. Alright, you actually, this is a interesting place. You can't actually read محكية or محكية over here. Okay, you'd have to read محكية بالقول. Why? Because later on he's going to say ومعلقا. Notice how you're saying ومعلقا عنها العامل. This is in nasab. Why do we know it's in nasab clearly? Because the ras and the way it's written is with an alif. So on account of that, it cannot be in jar. Jar and rafa is already out the window. So therefore, the original structures, mahkiyatan, taliyatan, these have to be in nasab. Alright, and it's an nasab on account of being badalul ishtimal. Badalul ishtimal. والمفعولية تقع في 4 مواضع. The maf'uliyya occurs in 4 places. Number 1, mahkiyatan bilqawl. It's being coded. Now what does mahkiyatan bilqawl means? Literally it's being coded. إيراد اللفظ على صورته الأولى. This is what hikayah means. إيراد اللفظ على صورته الأولى. You should write that down. Nahwu, such as قال إني عبد الله. Notice over here, إني عبد الله is a full sentence. Because it's being coded, it's kept upon its original structure of being a full sentence. And it's في محل نصب لأنها محكية بالقول. وتالية للمفعول الأول في باب ظن. And it's coming after the first maf'ul in the chapter or in the case of ظن. Such as نحو, not chapter, in the case of ظن. Such as ظننت زيدا يقرأ. I assume Zayd, or I believe Zayd to be reading. Okay, now over here, number 1, why is he saying it's coming after the first maf'ul bihi, meaning it's serving as the second maf'ul bihi? Because the first maf'ul bihi in the chapter of dhanna will always be mubtada, right? It's actually mubtada. Second maf'ul bihi is what was originally the khabar. Number 2, if you have a mufrad over here, ظننت زيدا قائم, that's not في محل نصب, that's just mansub. So when you're looking for examples of this, keep this in mind. Look for examples where the second maf'ul bihi is a full sentence. Don't find an example of a mufrad serving as second maf'ul bihi, because that's not fi mahalli nasb, that's simply mansub. I'rab is going to be lafzi or taqdiri over there. So ظننت زيدا قارئ wouldn't really be accurate over here. ظننت زيدا قارئا or ظننت زيدا قائمة wouldn't be accurate. I want you to find a full sentence. ظننت زيدا يقرأ. And to make things easy, don't look for a jar majrur either. Not to make things easy, to make things more accurate and precise. Don't look for a jar majrur and don't look for a ظرف. Find me a full sentence. ظننت زيدا يقرأ. وتالية للمفعول الثاني, or it's following the second مفعول به في باب أعلم, in the chapter of أعلم. What does أعلم mean? You just take علم, which comes with a مبتدا and a khabar as its first and second مفعول به, and you convert it into the ثلاثي مزيد فيه, it becomes أعلم. علم means to know. أعلم means to inform regarding something. So أعلمت زيدا, I informed Zayd. أمرا أبوه قائم, that Amr, comma, his father is standing. Understood? Zayd is the first مفعول به. And then this over here, it was actually the mubtada. أبوه قائم was actually the khabar, and then the mubtada becomes the second مفعول به, مفعول به ثانٍ. And khabar becomes مفعول به ثالث. Now obviously over here, the sentence as the whole will be serving في محل نصب لأنها نعم لأنها تالية للمفعول الثاني من باب أعلم. Okay, تالية للمفعول الثاني means it's coming after the second مفعول. You can also call it the third مفعول. Okay. ومعلقا عنها العامل. And likewise, the fourth place where you're going to have this is where the amil has been suspended. Now, this discussion we will cover later, بإذن. The amil has been suspended from governing it, such as نحو لنعلم أي الحزبين أحصى and فلينظر أيها أزكى طعاما. This we'll cover later on, بإذن, and make it very simple and easy for you to understand. Let's take a few examples for sentences which is in a state of hal. One example is the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَلَا تَمْنُن تَسْتَكْثِرْ. وَلَا تَمْنُن تَسْتَكْثِرْ. Don't show others favors. Don't give favors to others, expecting more in return. Now that's a very interesting translation. If you look at the surah, okay, you'll notice that from the beginning of the surah you have these verses back to back. يا أيها المدثر قم فأنذر وربك فكبر وثيابك فطهر والرجز فهجر ولا تمنن تستكثر. Now in all the previous verses, يا أيها المدثر قم فأنذر سكونتين وربك فكبر سكونتين وثيابك فطهر سكونتين, etc, etc. But in this specific verse you don't have a sukun at the end, because if you were to say ولا تمنن تستكثر and to bring a sukun at the end, the meaning would be invalid. Why would the meaning be invalid? The meaning would become ولا تمنن, don't give others favors, or don't what's it called, benefit others, don't give others favors. تستكثر, comma, you will receive more in return. But that's not what's being said. What's being said is ولا تمنن, don't give others favors in the state that تستكثر, you are seeking more in return. You understand? And for this reason, if you were to put this in jazm, it would ruin the entire meaning. And this is an example of why i'rab is important in the fi'l mudari. And sure, ولا تمنن تستكثر, you cannot read this as ولا تمنن تستكثر assuming it to be in jazm. That would be a mistake. This word needs to be in rafa, meaning تستكثر, the fi'l mudari in and of itself needs to be in rafa because there's no nasab giver or jazm giver. But the sentence as a whole, is في محل نصب لأنها حال. Don't give others expecting more in return. أي ولا تمنن مستكثرا. Alright, remember we said it can be replaced with a mufrad. Okay. And clearly Ibn Ashur writes over here وتستكثر جملة في موضع الحال من ضمير تمنن وهي حال مقدر. What does حال مقدر mean? It means it's forwarded into the future as well. Right? Don't give expecting people to return back to you in the future, to give you more in in the future. That's not what your intention should be. Your intention should be to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وقوله تعالى, and likewise the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَمَا كَادُوا يَفْعَلُونَ. Now this, we have to write the previous structure to understand this. فَذَبَحُوهَا. So they slaughtered the calf. وَمَا كَادُوا يَفْعَلُونَ, or the cow, whereas they were not about to do so. That's one translation. Or the other translation would be, or whereas previously they did not want to do so. Second translation would be, whereas it was very difficult for them to do so. Why did it translate in those two manners? Tafsir discussion. For now, let's just understand over here that وَمَا كَادُوا يَفْعَلُونَ serving as the hal. وما كانوا يفعلون serving as the حال from the wawin فذبحوها. These slaughtered the baqarah, the cow, even though they were close to not doing so. They were previously close to not doing so. طيب. Likewise, the third example, يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تقربوا الصلاة وأنتم سكارى. O you who believe, do not approach salah whilst you are already drunk, whilst you're in a state of being drunk. Okay. Now notice over here the verse continues. وأنتم سكارى حتى تعلموا ما تقولون ولا جنوبا. Nor should you approach salah when you are in a state of major impurity. Now this is a really good example. Why? Because today, or from this example, sorry, you understand the importance of sentences having a mahal. Someone's going to ask, what difference does it make whether a sentence has a mahal or not? Because regardless of whether a sentence has a mahal or not, you can't see the i'rab. So why does it make a difference whether the sentence has a mahal or not? And this is why the commentators on Ibn Hisham's books and others, they reply that no, this is important. Because if you don't understand the mahal of a sentence, if you have a single word ma'tuf upon it, how will you give that word i'rab? If you've yet to understand the mahal of a sentence, is it in mahal of nasab, rafa or jar? And then you have an ism mu'rab coming ma'tuf upon it, how will you give that ism mu'rab i'rab? Now over here, وَأَنْتُمْ سُكَارَى, because it's becoming حالية. الجملة في محل نصب لأنها حال. ولا جنوبا, which is عطف upon it, is clearly in حال. But a person who doesn't understand that when they're forming their own sentences, they wouldn't be able to do so. So don't think that the mahal of sentence is something which is just you just learn it for theory. No, it's very applicable, and it is also very important. Because if you don't understand this, you won't be able to understand what the ma'tuf upon that sentence, which i'rab it would receive. Okay, and beyond that, Ibn Ashur, he actually mentions something very interesting. He says, وهذا النصب بعد العطف دليل بين على أن جملة الحال معتبرة في محل نصب. This is the clear proof that the sentence, which is serving as the hal, experiences as a whole, it's in the place of nasab. Why is it in the place of nasab? Because had it been switched out with a non-sentence, that non-sentence would also be in nasab. Okay. Another example, قالوا أنؤمن لك واتبعك الأرذلون. Now over here, this sentence over here, should we believe in you, whereas these lowly people are following you. This sentence واتبعك الأرذلون is a حالية, but this is a فعل ماضي. What is the condition for a فعل ماضي serving as the حال in a مثبت sentence? It needs to be preceded by قد. For that reason, over here, they're going to actually mention that there's an assumed qad over here. You'll come across this from time to time where the qad is actually dropped off. You have to assume it because the condition of the sentence serving as a hal is that there needs to be a qad behind the fi'l madi, which is muthbat, along with the waw. So over here, we'd have to assume a qad in order to make this a jumla, which is haliyah. Should we follow you, the people of Nuh said to him, even though, or whereas these lowly people are following you. أنؤمن لك واتبعك الأرذلون قال وما علمي بما كانوا يعملون. Subhanallah. This is a beautiful verse, and it really shows you the beauty of the Quran. And Ibn Ashur explained this really well. In fact, we'll explain this. We'll explain this because it's a very interesting statement. Now, the people of Nuh alayhi salam, they were ridiculing him, and they were basically questioning, and they said, why should we follow you? The people who are following you are who? It's this lowly peasants, these lowly peasants who are working, they're doing they're hardly making anything. They're poor people. They work day in, day out. And we're kings over here. So why should we lower our standard to meet people like yourself? And Nuh alayhi salam immediately replies, وَمَا عِلْمِي بِمَا كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ. Like, what does it matter to me what actions or what work they're doing? That's irrelevant to me. Now, when you read this verse at first, you might not understand exactly what Nuh alayhi salam is saying, right? But Ibn Ashur explains it really well. He says, وَجَوَابُ نُوحٍ عَنْ كَلَامِ قَوْمِهِ يَحْتَاجُ إِلَى تَدْقِيقٍ فِي لَفْظِهِ وَمَعْنَاهِ. You have to really understand the lafz, the wording, the structure that's used, and likewise the meaning. What is he intending? فَأَمَّا لَفْظُهُ فَاقْتِرَانُ أَوَّلِهِ بِالْوَاوِ يَجْعَلُهُ فِي حُكْمِ الْمَعْطُوفِ عَلَى كَلَامِ قَوْمِهِ تَنْبِيهًا عَلى اتصاله بكلامهم. Now, we've actually explained this previously in our lessons on متممة, when we covered the harf al-ataf, the waw specifically, and we said that there are specific ahkam that are specific to the waw. And one of those ahkam is what we refer to as atfu talqeen. atfu talqeen. What does atfu talqeen mean? A says a sentence and B adds on a ma'tuf to that sentence. Now, B doesn't actually repeat a sentence, but right away B will add on a ma'tuf to that sentence. And one of the benefits of this is that it indicates that you add the sentence on right away. Can Zayd come with Zayd call Zayd as well? For instance, you call someone to a da'wah and you tell them call Zayd, and you immediately answer and Amr. So notice over here that the second sentence and Amr, you're adding this on to the questioner's not questioner, the first statement. Call Zayd is statement made by person A. B immediately replies and Amr. So and Amr is an extension of person A's statement. And the benefit of this is it shows that this kalam was said right away. Immediately, the fact that it's ataf is a sign that you didn't have to repeat the verb again. Immediately you replied with this. So that's why Ibn Ashur says, تنبيها على اتصاله بكلامهم. The fact that this wow over here is mentioned is an example. It shows that he immediately replied. وذلك كناية عن مبادرته بالجواب. He didn't hesitate to say this. He said it immediately. كما في قوله تعالى حكاية عن إبراهيم عليه السلام قال ومن ذريتي. Right? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told Ibrahim إني جاعلك للناس إماما, that I will make you a leader for the people, immediately Ibrahim asked, ومن ذريتي, what about my progeny? Alright? And they call this atfu talqeen, but Ibn Ashur said you should actually call this atfu takmil, because it's just an extension of the previous discussion. Talqeen means that you're teaching someone what to say, but technically speaking, this is atfu takmil. It's an extension of the previous statement. Now, the meaning. وأما معناه فهو استفهام مؤذن بأن قومه فصلوا إجمال وصفهم أتباعه بالأرذلين بأن بينوا أوصافا من أحوال أهل الحاجة الذين لا يعبأ الناس بهم. He says that why is he asking this question? Right? This question tells us that the people, when they say that they're lowly people, they began to say, oh, they don't work. I mean, they're working all day long, all night long. They hardly make anything. They're poor. We were people of respect. We were people who have high standards, and we have a much higher status in society. Right? They're mentioning all this. And Nuh alayhi salam immediately answers to them, وَمَا عِلْمِي بِمَا كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ فَأَتَى بِالْإِسْتِفْهَامِ عَنْ عِلْمِهِ استفهاما مستعملا في قلة الاعتناء بالمستفهم عنه. Why did Nuh alayhi salam answer with a question? Sometimes someone says something to you, and they're talking and talking and talking, and you're like, so what? Now, why are you saying this? You don't actually want to learn the answer of so what. Correct? If someone comes to you and they say that, I'm going to call so-and-so people behind you, and you bother me, so I'm going to come after you. And you're like, so let's assume, for instance, let's take Zayd's name again. Zayd is an extremely, scary person. So Muhammad comes to you and says that, you're bothering me. I'm going to call Zayd to attack you. And you're like, who's Zayd? Now, obviously, you don't obviously want the answer to the question, who is Zayd? That's irrelevant to you. But you're showing Muhammad that I couldn't care less who you're calling and who you want to and gang up on me with, essentially. All right? So the reason you're saying this is not because you actually want an answer, is to show them you couldn't care less, or what they're saying doesn't affect you in the least. Likewise, over here, فَأَتَى بِالْإِسْتِفْهَامِ عَنْ عِلْمِهِ استفهاما مستعملا في قلة الاعتناء بالمستفهم عنه. Nuh alayhi salam is telling them that you're asking, right? And should we follow you even though these lowly people follow you? So what if the lowly people follow me? Why does that stop you from following me? وهو كناية عن قلة جدواه لأن الاستفهام عن الشيء يؤذن بالجهل به والجهل تلازمه قلة العناية بالمجهول وضعف شأنه. He says this, what's intended is not actually he's asking them a question. What's intended through this is to tell them that your reasoning is irrelevant to me because your reasoning holds no ground and it holds no weight. كما يقال, like for instance, someone was to say to you, يهددك فلان, so and so person is threatening you, فتقول, and you say, وما فلان, who is so and so? أي لا يعبأ به. You couldn't care less about this person. That's what's being said over here. And after understanding this explanation, you understand why Nuh alayhi salam answered immediately without hesitation in the manner he did. It's not that Nuh alayhi salam was looking down upon their actions, right? وَمَا عِلْمِي بِمَا كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ, or that he was saying that I don't know what they're doing. Rather, Nuh alayhi salam was telling them, the people who were in front of him, the leaders of his people, who were telling him that only the poor people follow you. So what if only the poor people follow me? Their answer is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and your answer is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so you should also follow me. And this is a beautiful explanation of this verse, and it shows the genius of Ibn Ashur. Now we'll move on to the other example the author brought of a sentence which is serving as a maf'ul bihi, when it would serve as in the state of nasl. The first example you brought is mahkiyatan bil qawl, or the first place you brought is mahkiyatan bil qawl, when it is being when a statement is being quoted. And the example over here is this statement, إنما نحن مصلحون. قالوا, they said, إنما نحن مصلحون. So this is a full sentence. It's في محل نصب لأنها محكية بالقول. All right. Now, with that, I want you to look into in the entire structure. And does anything pop out to you aside from قالوا إنما نحن مصلحون? Yeah? What should pop out to you is the fact that this statement, وإذا قيل لهم لا تفسدوا في الأرض, this is also محكية بالقول. But despite it being محكية بالقول, it is not في محل نصب. This is في محل رفع. This is what I mentioned previously. That certain times you have قال, but because it's being used in the صيغة of مجهول as a passive verb, as الفعل المبني للمفعول. وإذا قيل لهم, what was originally the مفعول به and nasab will actually revert to the state of رفع, or will be brought in the state of رفع on account of now becoming the نائب الفاعل. So over here we wouldn't say في محل نصب, we would say لا تفسدوا في الأرض. This sentence, الجملة في محل رفع لأنها محكية بالقول. Whereas إنما نحن مصلحون is في محل نصب لأنها محكية بالقول. The difference is that the first verb قيل is brought in the passive voice and therefore it requires a نائب الفاعل, and the second verb قالوا is brought in the active voice and therefore it requires a مفعول به. Now, we mentioned to you previously that the reason, one of the benefits of this course is that we want you to understand how i'rab affects tafsir. And today you'll see this. I'm sure you've already seen this multiple times previously, but in the previous examples we gave you, much of what we were mentioning were balagha benefits. What we're going to mention to you right now is purely based on i'rab and nahwu. And it's mentioned by Abu Hayyan in his Al-Bahr al-Muhit. The verse before this is the very same verse we looked at a few minutes ago. What is that verse? وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ بِمَا كَانُوا يَكْذِبُونَ. We mentioned this previously, correct? This structure over here. وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ بِمَا كَانُوا يَكْذِبُونَ. Now, I want you to pause the video. If you can open Surah Baqarah, I think it's the 10th and 11th verse. No, 10th and 11th verse. Read the context and try understanding different i'rabs over here. This wow, how does it connect to the previous sentence? وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ بِمَا كَانُوا يَكْذِبُونَ. All right. The previous structure was وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ بِمَا كَانُوا يَكْذِبُونَ, that they will experience a painful torment, a painful punishment due to or on account of the lies they used to spew, or on account of their belying of the message. Okay, and we're going to take the recitation of وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ بِمَا كَانُوا يُكَذِّبُونَ over here. Again, this can also still mean to spew lies, as mentioned by Al-Sameen al-Halabi. Okay. وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ. Over here, you can make وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ a new sentence. What happens if you make it a new sentence? Well, if you make it a new sentence, it's no longer connected to the previous sentence. So the reason this is being brought is to further show what despicable people and what pathetic people these hypocrites are. That when it's said to them, don't cause chaos and corruption and don't spread corruption within the earth, they say we're just peacemakers. أَلَا إِنَّهُمْ هُمُ الْمُفْسِدُونَ. Even though in reality they are the ones who corrupt and cause chaos. وَلَكِنْ لَا يَشْعُرُونَ. But they fail to understand. وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ آمِنُوا كَمَا آمَنَ النَّاسِ. When it's said to them to believe, such as just as the believers have believed, they say, أَنُؤْمِنُ كَمَا آمَنَ السُّفَهَاءُ. Should we believe as these foolish, ignorant people have believed? أَلَا إِنَّهُمْ هُمُ السُّفَهَاءُ وَلَكِنْ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. Behold, it is they who are the foolish ones, but they don't realize. Naam. This verse over here, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ, if you make it a separate sentence, the purpose of these verses onwards is simply to show what pathetic people these hypocrites are and what despicable people they are. However, Zamakhshari and Abu al-Baqa, they mention a separate i'rab. They say you can also say that this waw is a harf al-ataf. The waw is not for istinaf, it's not to start a new sentence. Later on when we study the jumal which don't have a mahal min al-i'rab. The first of those jumal is al-jumlat al-musta'nafa. All right, this would be an example of al-jumlat al-musta'nafa. If you were to say this is al-jumlat al-musta'nafa, we say this sentence over here, la mahal laha min al-i'rab. It's a new structure altogether. It's like a new paragraph essentially. Okay, it's a new structure altogether. It's not connected to what's mentioned previously. However, Abu al-Baqa and Zamakhshari, they say we can actually make this ataf upon yukadhibun. This is the ma'tuf alayh. And idha qeel onwards will become the ma'tuf. And based on this, فَإِذَا ذَاكَ يَكُونُ لَهَا مَوْضِعٌ مِنَ الْإِعْرَابِ وَهُوَ النَّصْبُ. Now it will also receive a place in the i'rab. Remember we say if it's jumla musta'nafa, if it's a new structure altogether, then we would say إِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ onwards is لَا مَحَلَّ لَهَا مِنَ الْإِعْرَابِ لِأَنَّهَا جُمْلَةٌ مُسْتَأْنَفَةٌ. But if you say this is a waw al-ataf, it's not the waw of istinaf. On account of it being the waw al-ataf, إِذَا قِيلَ is ataf, that entire sentence as a whole is ataf upon يُكَذِّبُونَ. Well, يُكَذِّبُونَ was in the state of nasab on account of being the khabar of kana. Therefore, إِذَا قِيلَ will also be in nasab on account of being a tabi' of the khabar of kana. So the i'rab will change. And likewise, the meaning will change entirely. How does the meaning change entirely? Now the meaning is no longer, and they will have a painful punishment because of the lies they used to spew, comma or period. These people are so despicable, that's in like brackets, that when it is said to them, don't cause corruption within the earth, they say, we are simply peacemakers. That was the initial translation. Now the translation will change. And they will have a painful punishment on account of, because of the lies they used to spew, and because when it is said to them, don't cause corruption in the earth, they say we are simply peacemakers. Notice how the meaning changed entirely, and the i'rab changed entirely as well. إِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ لَا تُفْسِدُوا was a jumla musta'nafa according to the first interpretation. And according to that first interpretation, لَا مَحَلَّ لَهَا مِنَ الْإِعْرَابِ, and the meaning is such that it's a new sentence altogether. But if we say that the waw is a harf al-ataf, now it's no longer لا محل لها من الإعراب, it's في محل نصب لأنها معطوفة على خبر كان. And meaning wise, the meaning changes because وإذا قيل لهم is no longer a separate kalam, rather it's becoming a part of the reasoning for them experiencing a painful punishment. Now let's read what Abu Hayyan says. He says وإذا قيل لهم لا تفسدوا جملة شرطية ويحتمل أن تكون من باب عطف الجمل استئنافا. نعم، ويحتمل أن تكون من باب عطف الجمل استئنافا ينعي عليهم قبائح أفعالهم وأقوالهم، ويحتمل أن يكون كلاما، وفي الثاني جزء كلام لأنها من تمام الصلة. He says that it's possible what's being said over here. نعم, I think the actual structure should be ويحتمل أن تكون من باب عطف الجمل comma ويحتمل أن يكون كلاما استئنافا ينعي عليهم قبائح أفعالهم وأقوالهم وفي الثاني جزء كلام. I'll look into this after inshallah. Now, what he's saying over here is that it's possible that this is ataf on the previous sentence. If we say it's ataf on the previous sentence, he says this إذا قيل لهم is not a full structure. It's connecting to the previous structure. Remember we taught you in the previous lesson that there's a difference between kalam and jumla. And we taught you that when you have a sentence within a bigger sentence, we quoted Kafiya Ji on this. جاء الذي يدرس. When you have a sila within a bigger sentence, that sila in and of itself is not a kalam, it's merely a jumla because you have isnad of A to B. But it won't be considered a kalam up until it's connected together with the bigger sentence. Based on this, إذا قيل, if you said the waw is a waw of ataf, this will not be a kalam. Rather, this structure over here would be a juz of a kalam. If you say the waw is a waw al-ataf because it's playing a role in a bigger sentence. However, if you say it's a jumla musta'nafa, it's a new sentence altogether, then according to that, on account of it being a new sentence altogether, you would say that this is actually a kalam in and of itself. وَيَحْتَمِلُ أَن يَكُونَ كَلَامًا, it's a kalam in and of itself. وَأَجَازَ الزَّمَخْشَرِيُّ. Okay, this min babi atf al-jumla, let's leave this for now. Don't worry about that. That was a different discussion altogether. Sorry about that. نعم وأجاز الزمخشري وبالبقاء أن تكون معطوفة على يكذبون. Zamakhshari and Abu al-Baqa, they say it's possible to consider this to be معطوف upon يكذبون. That sentence يكذبون. And accordingly, we would say over there that فإذ ذاك يكون لها موضع من الإعراب. It would receive a place, or it would be acting as it will be in the place of نصب لأنها معطوفة على خبر كان والمعطوف على الخبر خبر وهي إذ ذاك جزء من السبب الذي استحق به العذاب الأليم. And in that scenario, it's a part of the reason due to which they are now entitled to this great torment. وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. They will have a great punishment. بِمَا, because ba is for sababiyya, due to the action, due to them spewing lies, and because وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ لَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ, when it was said to them that do not cause corruption in the land, they would say إِنَّمَا نَحْنُ مُصْلِحُونَ. Now Abu Hayyan will tackle this. وعلى الاحتمالين الأولين لا تكون جزءا من الكلام. What do you say is جملة, what do you say is عطف استئنافا, leave that, we're not going to mention that. Or you say وفي الثاني جزء كلام, or you say that it is what's it called, it's a new جملة مستأنفة altogether. Then in these two scenarios لا تكون جزءا من الكلام, it will not be a part of a previous speech, it's a new speech altogether. وهذا الوجه الذي أجازاه على أحد وجهي ما من قوله بما كانوا يكذبون خطأ. Now he says that saying that it's possible for يكذبون to be معطوف upon saying that it's possible for إذا قيل لهم to be معطوف upon يكذبون based on one of the two views in ما is a mistake. Why? وهو أن تكون ما موصولة وهو أن تكون ما عفوا موصولة بمعنى الذي. He says if you say that the ma is موصولة, he's assuming that Abu al-Baqqa and Zamakhshari were considering the ma over here بما كانوا يكذبون to be موصولة. He told you if the ma is موصولة, this is really بما كانوا يكذبون who. Okay, and then you make عطف of this, of the upcoming structure, وإذا قيل لهم, upon this ma, وإذا قيل لهم. Okay, he says فيكذبون قد حذف منه العائد على ما, وقوله وإذا قيل لهم إلى آخر الآية لا ضمير فيها يعود على ما، فبطل أن يكون معطوفا عليه إذ يصير التقدير ولهم عذاب أليم بالذي كانوا إذا قيل لهم لا تفسدوا في الأرض قالوا إنما نحن مصلحون. He says that this idea that you're making this structure عطف upon يكذبون, and that those are both becoming the صلة of ما. The issue with this is there's no pronoun inside إذا قيل لهم, that entire sentence referring back to the ma. And since there's no pronoun referring back to it, you cannot actually make it عطف upon يكذبون if you're taking the ma to be a موصولة. However, وأما وجه الآخر, as for the other view, where you say that the ma is not موصولة, rather the ma is مصدرية. وأما على مذهب الجمهور فهذا الإعراب شائع. Alright, they are of the opinion that according to the madhab of Jumhur, this i'rab is correct and it's very prevalent. Okay, where you take the ma to be masdariya and not mawsula. So this is really in the power of بتكذيبهم ولأنه إذا قيل لهم. That's what it's actually in the power of. والذي نختاره الاحتمال الأول. Now after all this, Abu Hayyan says our view is that the first interpretation is correct. What is the first interpretation? The first interpretation, as mentioned by Abu Hayyan, is that this jumla over here is not actually ataf upon the previous structure in yukadhibun. Rather, this sentence over here is serving as a jumla musta'nafa. It's a new sentence altogether. And then he explains why he gives preference to this view. He says that the reason he's giving preference to this view is that وهو أن تكون الجملة مستأنفة. We're going to understand the structure to be a new sentence altogether. إذ هذه الجملة والجملتان بعدها هي من تفاصيل الكذب ونتائج التكذيب. These structures coming after this are not the reasoning they're receiving a painful punishment. That's because they spewed lies. But these structures are explaining the lies they spewed. Understood? ألا ترى قولهم, do you not see their statement إنما نحن مصلحون وقولهم أنؤمن كما آمن السفهاء وقولهم عند لقاء المؤمنين آمنا كذب محض. These are all statements of lies. They're all lies of theirs. So these structures that are coming afterwards, وإذا لقوا الذين آمنوا قالوا آمنا وإذا خلوا إلى شياطينهم قالوا إنا معكم إنما نحن مستهزئون. All of these structures coming afterwards, they're actually detailing the lies they made. So the statement بما كانوا يكذبون, due to the lies they were spewing, over there يكذبون is the sole reason behind their punishment, behind them being entitled to this painful torment. But what were these lies? That's answered in the next statement. وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ لَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ. And when you have this idea where sentence A is being answered in sentence B, that's not a scenario of ma'tuf alayhi ma'tuf. That's actually a scenario of istinaf. Over there, we're going to assume that a new sentence is starting entirely, and that new sentence is explaining the previous sentence, and we would call that a jumla musta'nafa. So once again, there's two i'rabs over here. There's actually three. We're going to mention only two. First i'rab is that you do ataf of وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ عَنْ بِمَا كَانُوا يُكَذِّبُونَ. In this scenario, or on يُكَذِّبُونَ to be exact, in this scenario, what's going to happen is that وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ is no longer a جملة مستأنفة لا محل لها من الإعراب. Rather, it's a جملة في محل نصب لأنها معطوف على الخبر. Alright, بما كانوا يكذبون, because it's معطوف upon the خبر of كانوا, it will also be في محل نصب. And meaning wise, it will be a reasoning. It will be a part of the reasoning of them being entitled to that painful torment and that painful punishment. But if you were to do this, you cannot assume the ma to be mawsula. That would be incorrect. Because the moment you assume the ma to be mawsula, it needs to have an aid referring back to it. إِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ does not have any aid referring back to it. Rather, you have to assume the ma to be masdariya, which according to the majority of opinion is a very prevalent i'rab. And again, the meaning is very nice as well. However, Abu Hayyan himself does not prefer this meaning. Abu Hayyan says that, look, let's look at the verses coming after بما كانوا يكذبون. وإذا قيل لهم لا تفسدوا في الأرض قالوا إنما نحن مصلحون. وإذا قيل لهم آمنوا كما آمن الناس قالوا أنؤمن كما آمن السفهاء. وإذا لقوا الذين آمنوا قالوا آمنا. These are all lies. Lie after lie after lie. So instead of doing ataf of their specific lies upon their general takdeeb, rather, what's really happening over here is that these upcoming sentences are explaining their lies. And this scenario where we have sentence B explaining sentence A, over here the correct method of i'rab, or the more accurate method of i'rab, is not actually to make it ataf, or rather is to make it a jumla musta'nafa. And this will come later on when we cover the jumal which have la mahalla, which don't experience any mahal min al-i'rab. Naam. That's why he says فناسب جعل ذلك جملا مستقلة ذكرت لإظهار كذبهم ونفاقتهم ونسبة السفه للمؤمنين واستهزائهم. It's only appropriate that we make these separate sentences all together. And these separate sentences were mentioned to detail and to mention the different lies and to show their hypocrisy and to show how they accused the believers of being foolish and to show how they mocked them. فكثر بهذه الجمل واستقلالها, on account of the prevalence of these sentences and them being stand-alone sentences, as opposed to being a sentence connected to the previous structure. كَثُرَ ذَنْبُهُمْ وَالرَّدُّ عَلَيْهِمْ. Right? The reasons for insulting them and for rebuking them and for holding them to account are even more. وَهَذَا أَوْلَى مِنْ جَعْلِهَا صِلَةً جُزْءَ كَلَامٍ لِأَنَّهَا إِذْ ذَاكَ لَا تَكُونُ مَقْصُودَةً لِذَاتِهَا. If we were to make this a part of the sila, now at this point the sentence alone isn't intended. It's intended in so as much as its role in the bigger sentence. Okay? And that's not what's being said over here. Rather, Abu Hayyan says what's being said over here is to detail their lies so that on account of each and every single one of these lies, they will be held accountable. And they will be, and it shows what pathetic and despicable people they are. And then we bring another example. ثم يقال هذا الذي كنتم به تكذبون. Once again over here, يقال is a فعل مجهول, or we say it's الفعل المبني للمفعول. And for that reason, we would say هذا الذي كنتم به تكذبون. الجملة في محل رفع, not في محل نصب, even though it's still محكية بالقول. Now, the last discussion the author mentioned over here with regards to معلقا عنها العامل. This we will cover tomorrow بإذن الله in our next lesson. Exactly what does this mean? We'll cover in detail along with the other sentences which experience the state within i'rab. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.